Hi, I'm your host, Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. All right, so we are joined here today by two awesome guests, two industry experts, two people I really admire. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So we're joined here by Dr. Kim Cavitt and Karl Strom. So Kim, why don't you lead us off? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you for having me. I'm Kim Cavitt. I am an audiologist by training. I've been an audiologist since the late 1980s, I guess. Spent some the first third of my career in hardcore clinical services. I could say I've done everything in audiology once except for VEMPs. And then I got a skill set in coding and reimbursement and compliance. And so for the last 19 years, I have been the owner of an audiology consulting business that works in training and coding and reimbursement and compliance.
Awesome. Karl?
I'm Karl Strom. I'm the editor of the Hearing Review. I have been reporting on hearing healthcare issues for over 25 years. We started the magazine back in January of '94, and prior to that, I was into marketing. I was in the window and door industry as a marketing manager, as well as a stint in specialty lubricants, which sounds salacious, but actually was in the automotive aftermarket industry. I was a marketing and sales support guy there, technical writer. And I've also worked in publishing prior to that with Advanced Star. So I've been in the industry now for 25 plus years, and I am a statistics nerd, and I look forward to our discussion, and thank you for having me, Dave.
So you're a statistics nerd? That's awesome. I'm a statistics nerd. I'm a data nerd too. And
we're going to totally geek out here.
Yeah. Are you a baseball guy too? Because you have to. Yes, you have to.
I'm a Stratomatic baseball fan. We played Stratomatic baseball throughout my entire life.
So did my husband. And his little small claim to fame is when Nate Silver, if you don't know who Nate Silver is from 538, Nate Silver used to live here in Chicago, and my husband used to be in a baseball geek club with Nate Silver. And they used to meet at the Giordano's on Belmont and drink beer and talk about baseball statistics.
That's hilarious. That is awesome.
Yeah, that's how nerdy. My husband is a super baseball nerd because he works in big credit and stuff. So he's a big data nerd too.
So a Cubs fan, I'm guessing.
Season ticket holder since 1999. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we got Cubs, Cardinals, and Karl, what are you?
Twins.
Yes,
okay.
be a Twins. I could be a Twins fan.
We've taken the place of the Cubs with 18 consecutive playoff losses. So we're trying to claim fame to the desperate losers.
I could be a Twins fan though. I got to tell you, I could be a Twins fan. Yeah.
Well, cool. All right. So I'm really glad you two joined. For everybody that's listening, when I first kind of started to come into this industry full time in 2016, these were two people that I really immediately recognized as being two of the most, I think, intelligent people within the industry and just progressive thinkers in terms of where the industry is going. Karl, being the editor for his publication, and then Kim with her newsletter, two things that I've been reading for a while now, and it's really influenced the way that I think about kind of the way this whole industry is evolving. And so what I wanted to do for this conversation today to kick things off, I think it's going to be kind of just a wide spanning conversation about all kinds of different audiology related topics and the industry and the state of it and how it's sort of evolving. I wanted to highlight an article that each of them have written written recently that I thought was really good and good fodder for us to sort of lead into a broader discussion. So, Karl, I want to start with your article. You wrote a piece called Sound Quality as the Tipping Point for Younger, Milder Hearing Loss Market. In there, you had a lot of really interesting takeaways. So I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'd let you just go ahead and sort of share the gist of the article and some of your, kind of key takeaways from it.
Well, I started off, thank you, David. I started off talking about how back in the late 90s, I was on this after convention boat tour, and a hearing aid manufacturer, an owner of a hearing aid manufacturer, was really excited for me to listen to their new hearing aid. He was particularly excited about the sound quality of the hearing aid, and I listened to it, and it was better than cleaner than a lot of the other hearing aids that I had that I listened to before. But I had to feign kind of excitement in that it still kind of sounded like a 1990s hearing aid. Which is to say a little bit like listening, not as bad, but listening through a kind of a telephone, that kind of electronic-y sound to it. And more recently, particularly, sound quality has evolved and gotten a lot better through time. But in particular, in the last couple of years, the sound quality of hearing aids has really changed vastly. And I've been monkeying around with the Paradise and the Widex Moment, and I've also been listening to others at convention floors. And these hearing aids are really pretty much transparent. I have a flat hearing loss. It's about 20 to 25 dB to about 4,000 hertz, and then it tails off pretty significantly. So I'm kind of right in the wheelhouse of this mild to moderate hearing loss category. I have trouble hearing in noise. I have trouble listening on the TV, on TV, or I want to turn it up too loud when my kids and my wife are in the room. So I have a lot of the typical problems of a person with mild hearing loss. What really struck me about trying out these hearing aids is that they're acoustically transparent. That is, that I don't notice when I have them on anymore. And I couldn't say that 2 or 3 years ago. I think several things, I don't know if we want to go into the technology of that, but I think the receivers have really improved, and the processing obviously has really improved in the hearing aids too. And we're starting to catch on, maybe in some cases to more linear amplification, like Mead Killian always has been talking about for 25 years. I won't go into it, but at any rate, they're a lot better than they were before. So in this article, I talked about how some of the problems, traditional problems we've had in getting into that mild hearing loss market. Obviously, acoustical transparency and sound quality is a big one, and is kind of, I think, one of the last hurdles. But we still have a fair number of hurdles remaining. Dispensing professionals have been taught, have been literally taught to, if you have a pure tone that's under, whatever 25 dB or whatever, that you're probably not a candidate for a hearing aid. And it's okay to tell people that, but I think you really need a needs assessment and a real, a hearing and noise and a real hearing assessment to determine whether or not a person has a problem. Somebody doesn't wake up in the morning and say, gee, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go down to an audiology office and have my hearing tested and spend, $5,000. That's not what normal people do.
And Karl, to interject, and then when they do that, they've just literally told that patient that they don't have a problem.
Right.
And that there's no solution to that problem. They've diminished. And then why would they go back?
Right.
Why would they go back into that type of setting? Why wouldn't they just, when they get home, go, I still got a problem? And then do it themselves.
Right. Right. And they came to you with a hearing problem. And I think it really, this kind of really strikes to one of the things we might want to talk about is the mild loss market really our market? And I think there's plenty of people, for all intents and purposes, there are plenty of hearing care practices who are doing a lot of business and who are set up for, really well in their communities, and don't, at least at this point, don't need to worry about mild hearing loss. I think I'm not trying to tell people what their business model should be. That's what I want to impress, make sure that people know is I'm not trying to tell you what you should do in your business. You should know what you want to do in your business. What I'm saying, though, is that I think the field of audiology and hearing healthcare in general should be solving hearing problems. And those hearing problems are comprehensive, from cradle to grave hearing problems that could include vestibular, and could include mild loss, and could include tinnitus, and could include if you think you have a hearing problem, I think we're the place where you ought to be able to go, even if you end up referring somebody and saying, I don't necessarily carry this product or whatever. Anyway, well, let's talk about that in a little bit, maybe. But it also boils down to that classic conversation. I think, Kim, you might have been in on that one at ADA meeting, where there's the retail versus the medical model, and which one are we? But
yeah.
But that's one issue. The other thing is that hearing aid manufacturers have made some really good products for the mild loss and economy market, and there's always what generally happens is that people adopt, or the dispensers end up adopting these for their economy market, and the dispensers are leery about them cannibalizing their profit margins, and so they use these things that are meant to be for mild losses for their baseline economy and basic aid.
So I want to jump in there, but that's because they've set up a business model that's based upon some calculation of invoice, rather than a business model that I have fixed prices based upon my break-even plus profit needs for the care I provide. And then the product is just the product. So you're going to make the same money for your time, regardless of the product you dispense. And now you're just giving the patient the product that they really need, because we know from studies from Harl at the University of Memphis, it's been replicated at University of Iowa, that's been replicated at Indiana, that's been replicated at Northwestern, that these studies show that the vast majority of patients, all they need are somewhere between 6 and 8 channels, some form of compression, some sort of feedback management, directional microphones, and a telecoil.
And not only that, but that very same with Robin Cox said, I think everybody was at Twitter because the study pitted, will you see improvement from a high premium level hearing aid compared to a basic level hearing aid? And what they found was that, with a giant caveat here, what they found was, no, there isn't difference in terms of the benefit that you can receive from them. But the real problem, the real thing they found, was that any good hearing aid fit using best practices will give you great benefit.
Yes.
And all the other, and there's tons of, we know that connectivity and rechargeability and all these other great things, you can pay a premium for those things if you're the consumer, and that's great. And I trying these new products out, It's amazing. You know, I think they're amazing hearing aids, and they're worth the money. My sister has a new hearing aid, and she loves it. She wears it all the time, and it's a premium aid. But you don't necessarily need that to benefit to get benefit from hearing aids. And we need to be a field, in my opinion, we need to be a field where if somebody comes in, and Kim, I'm going to steal your phrase. If somebody comes in with a $500 problem, they shouldn't have to pay $5,000 to have a solution. Of course they can, and that's great. But we should have solutions. Maybe not $500, but I think.
I want there to be $500 solutions.
But there's a price point. There's a price point there for, at least for your business, I would argue. And there's a lot of really good PSAPs. You know, I could name 8 PSAPs anyway, that many of which that I've tried, that are really quite good for my mild hearing loss.
Yeah, again, and if we go back to like 2015, 2016, that's why ADA partnered with Intricon to make the EarVenture product line, so we could have a $500 solution.
Right.
I mean, that was the goal.
Right.
That's the whole thing, that someone could be evaluated and fit to best practices at a $500 a unit option.
Right. You know, and I would also like to clarify that I think, you know, the FDA is formulating these regulations for OTC hearing aids, and you can certainly disagree, but I think at some point, whether it's 50 dB or there's a number there somewhere, and I'm not an expert enough to tell you, but I don't think an OTC solution is going to be applicable for somebody with much more than a mild moderate loss.
Well, I just think we just need to be honest with people that the reason why is you're going to run into coupler problems. So you're going to run into feedback.
Right.
That's what's going to happen. It's not that necessarily can you not get the gain up enough. It's that you're going to run into feedback before you do. And that's what, like, they want to have these crazy things in the warnings about bloody ears. Like, that's the one that drove me over the edge. Why don't instead we warn people that when it squeals, when you have it in comfortably and it squeals, this is not the product for you.
Right.
Like, let's go simple.
Yeah.
Rather than the bloody ear. I mean, I worked in otolaryngology for 17 years, and I'm going to tell you that the bloody ear is not that common.
Yeah. I think that, you know, one of the ways that I'm looking at things right now is that, Kim, you touched on it earlier, but it all kind of boils down to time. Time is, I think, sort of at the root of everything right now, because again, you know, are we a widget-based industry, or are we a service-based industry? And I think that all signs, and I think most of the professionals in the industry would say that they're, you know, it's a service-based industry. They're providing care. They're providing.
You think so, Dave? You really think that's what they think? Carl, what do you think? I think that more of them see themselves as dispensers.
I don't. I will disagree with you there, Kim. I think.
You think?
But what I would say is that to your point, the adherence to best practices, where everybody should be doing what they know they should be doing, or if you've read it all, you know, I don't understand the disconnect between providing services and not adhering to best practices, you know, doing the real ear, you know, having a hearing assessment, doing verification and validation, doing speech and noise. That is essential services. And you know, it gets back also to a point that I always tell my kids: AI is coming, and it's going to change everything. I mean, we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now. If you're doing anything that can be automated, watch out, because it's going to go away. And so, you know, there's been a fair amount of talk about audiology returning to its rehabilitative resources, and I think that's a really healthy discussion. I think you would agree with that.
Oh, absolutely agree with that. People ask me, what do you see? How can audiology have a good future? And I'm like, practice audiology. I mean, that's really the key to audiology success is the practice of audiology to its fullest state-defined extent.
And
Well,
it's the key to it's the key to a good hearing aid fitting. I mean, we all
Yes.
know that 70% of at least 70% of a successful hearing aid fitting, and Robin Cox again, that Harl study showed it. It depends on what you do with the hearing aid in the person's ear, and how you counsel them, and how you bring them along on that better hearing journey, the customer journey, to find a successful outcome, and then to make sure that what they came in to have solved, if you can solve it, of course, is solved as best as you can.
Yeah, and that we're going to see more, I think Hume showed that to a degree in his study, but then conversely, Bose has shown that if you have the right algorithms and you have the right tools, that some people can do things themselves.
Right.
I just see this as a continuum. And the rate, if we go back and we look at the data from optometry, when reading glasses went over the counter, prescription eyeglass sales increased.
right.
Because people need a solution on their own kind of terms. And that's when I talk about accessibility. Our model's problem is not just about price. It's about the things that we require of people that may or may not be necessary because we want to do it this way.
Right.
And let me just really quick segue here to the article that I wanted to highlight for you, Kim. Another really good article, Accessibility as an Opportunity. So you just started to touch on it there, but can you really expand on the premise of this article?
Well, so if we go back and we look at what really drove the PCAST and what really drove the NASM report, it wasn't just about affordability. It was how easy is it to get a solution, amplification, some form of solution. And I think what we've been remiss about is we want to do it our way, that you need to come in and you need to do a hearing test, a full audio with us, and you need to come back and you need to get evaluated again, and then you need to come back and you need to get fit, and then you need to keep coming back even if you don't have problems. We feel like you need to come back in, and we don't realize that if someone is, especially now, they're doing homeschooling with their kids, they're trying to manage work, they're trying to maybe be a caregiver for their spouse or their parent, or they're an hourly employee or an employee that this is PTO in one big bucket and this isn't sick time. What we're asking them to take a day minimum, all in, an 8-hour day, to go down the journey that we've set. That really, do we have any evidence that shows that it's the right journey? I mean, we don't even have evidence to show. People were all upset about the US task force and that the whole hearing screening. We don't have evidence to show that hearing screening is valuable. So why do we insist on all of these things when there are studies to show now, whether we're looking at HearX study from University of Pretoria or we're looking at stuff from Bose that can show, hey, people can do some of these things themselves, but we're just gonna fight it. We're just gonna fight it rather than take in, hey, maybe it's a good thing to have all your patients screen their hearing themselves before they get there.
Right.
Pre-qualify, right.
I feel
see,
like
qualifies.
I feel like the real sort of existential question that needs to be asked here by every professional is, where does your value lie? And I think, to your point, Kim, it's this idea where with the prescription glasses leading to, or over-the-counter like cheaters leading to larger sales in prescription glasses, I feel as if if you make the technology more accessible, if you grow the market, even though you might actually not directly benefit from that, you're bringing more people into the market more or less. And I feel like that's going to be, I think, kind of going off of what the whole thing with Bose, it's like, there might be an element of do it yourself to this. There might be a significant element to that, but I tend to think that there's always going to be a portion of the market that wants to go to an expert. They want somebody that can serve that consultative role to say, look, this is what your loss is like, and here's how we're going to rehabilitate it. And they're going to actually serve as that like consultative type service. And for me, it's like, if that's the model where you can somehow find a way to make that viable, it doesn't really matter what you're selling product wise anymore, because okay, if the product is going to depreciate in its margins, and you can be selling a $500 device making, $150, or you can be selling $1,000 device and making $150. At the end of the day, what matters, I think, more is that the value that people are perceiving you to have is that you're the one that is more or less helping to guide them through that lifelong process that they're going to have, and they can defer to you with any sort of consultative type questions or anything like that they have.
Right. And Dave, maybe you didn't sell them anything and you made $150.
Exactly.
I mean, in my old life, we made we covered all of our overhead and expenses with diagnostics alone. I mean, you just have to have some of it's private pay, some of it, and you have to behave like an expert.
Yeah. Well, and that goes to your whole theme too about this accessibility piece, where if you make yourself more accessible, if you are conducive to people's hours and the remote element of things, you meet people where they want to be met rather than forcing them into your model. I feel like, to your point, it's not, then it doesn't necessarily even become something attached to a product or anything like that. It's all based in time and it's on your expertise.
And Karl was going to say something a minute ago.
No, a couple things. I think teleaudiology and all of those facets are really great things. Not just for the pandemic either. We're seeing teleaudiology kind of fade now back into the background as more and more face-to-face types of encounters with patients are now tenable. But it's really vital for the future. Teleaudiology is something that everybody should be doing, and particularly for baby boomers. It's probably, there is and I shouldn't say generation, it's person by person, but there are plenty of individuals who that's not going to be applicable for. But I do almost all of my healthcare through texting back and forth, usually with physician assistants. That's how I prefer it. I've got two boys. They get ear infections and broken legs and snowboarding, and so you're back and forth. But it's really a convenient, time-saving thing that baby boomers really appreciate, I think, particularly people who are working and have a lot of demands on their time. So that's one thing. Getting back to unbundling and all of that, the services. I also have a lot of dispensing professionals. Really, their hair goes up on end when if a hearing aid manufacturer starts to make noise about this OTC market, and I would say that they shouldn't be insecure. Your services are what drive your practice, or they should be. And I think, and you're free to disagree with me, but I think that there's nobody more qualified than hearing aid manufacturers to produce OTC hearing aids. They're the experts, and they're the ones who are dealing with you all the time. So they're with the dispensers all the time. So I think they're in the best position for our field to be producing all kinds of aids, and I know there are companies who adamantly did and people I've worked with for many, many years who adamantly disagree with me on that basis. But we're here to provide, I think our field should be here to provide hearing solutions.
Well, I'm going to agree and disagree. I think that they would be equally qualified. I think an Apple, I think a Amazon, I think a Bose, I think a company with a large, with unlimitedly deep pockets, and true to also technological know-how in the audio space, I think that they could create an equally a product at equal to anything any of those 5 hearing aid manufacturers could create. And maybe, in full disclosure, I know Andy Sabin. I knew Andy Sabin when Andy Sabin from Bose was a PhD student. Andy could be the head of R&D at any hearing aid manufacturer in the world.
For sure.
Let's just call it what it is.
You're right. And there's a reason he's there, right? I mean,
there's a reason he's there, because this was his theory. This was his theory.
Van Tassel before him, right?
And Diane Van Tassel. And we can even go back to Mead to a degree.
Right.
In that Mead.
I love Mead.
I mean, I love Mead too. And I think for me, it's my exposure to him. I think in my background, I went from exposure from working, I went to Indiana, so I had Larry Hume's undergrad and grad school, and I was actually in grad school with Laurel Christensen. So we go from that world to academic medicine. So like my old boss is the head of Mass Eye and Ear. And so I had to operate at kind of that kind of level. And then exposure, I go to Northwestern and I have this exposure to Mead and now to Pam Sousa and the work that you're doing, and you just take it kind of all in. And I actually wrote, even in 2004, I wrote a support letter to the FDA for Mead's second petition. It was just, we're just so stuck in fighting and in not like looking ahead. And I'm with Dave that and Karl, it makes me sad when people are getting away from telehealth. Why would you go backwards?
Right.
People, why don't you let your patient tell you what they want?
Ultimately, we need to meet the patient where they want to be met. And,
where they want to be met.
Many of, and maybe for the majority of people right now, that's not with teleaudiology, but for an awful lot of people coming down the pipe, it is. And for an awful lot of people right now who are seeking hearing solutions like myself for mild losses and just situational problems. There's another one that I disagree with a lot of. For a long time, the gauge of the success of a hearing aid is how long you wear the hearing aid, and there's something that I think we should also rethink. Yes, for a real hearing problem, obviously we want people to be wearing a hearing aid for a long period of time. But there are situational losses, mild losses like my own, where you might just only need a hearing aid once in a while at a meeting or this and that. And we think that's, I would contend that's something we might want to rethink. Hearing problems are hearing problems, and whether it's telephones or TV listening or whatever, we should be involved in that. Or at least be able to advise on that.
And I think I'm very passionate about the evaluation process. I think we need to have a stronger evaluation process that takes into account cognition and dexterity and processing and lifestyle and depression and everything, to look at the whole person, that it's more than an audio. The audio is just, and we also have to start to think, because I just did a thing where I went to I used to be an implant audiologist too, so I'm very passionate about how underserved that population is.
For sure.
That the hearing aid should just be, I used to tell my patients, the hearing aid is one of the tools in my toolbox. It's not my only tool. Like,
I love that.
And that we have to think more globally as to how to solve our patient's problem, even if it doesn't 100% involve me.
I think that like you just described right there, something that is so much harder to disrupt, because you just listed off like 10 different things that you're doing from a evaluation standpoint, right? Like these aren't things that necessarily an algorithm can replicate. An algorithm might be able to replicate something from a diagnostic standpoint, but if that's the only piece of value, if people are perceiving you as I go to you to get my hearing aids, then you're going to be much easier to be disrupted by these technology innovations and all of these new providers that are leveraging the internet in ways that I think people are kind of underestimating right now. And so I feel like if you can sort of change the perception to I'm going to, we're going to have a lifelong relationship kind of thing where you're going to defer to me as your, the expert for all of these things. I think that it completely alters the whole value proposition in the consumer's eyes, in the patient's eyes.
And when you need me, not when I tell
Right.
you you need me.
And I'm accessible to you
And I,
through all of these
right,
new
right.
remote elements. Another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on today that I've had a lot of discussions about offline and in person is another elephant in the room. Another thing that's sort of along the same vein as OTC. You hear a lot about these 3PAs, right? These patients that are coming in through these insurance providers. And I've talked to a lot of professionals before, and they say that, this is just unsustainable. I can't break even. I'm really curious to get your thoughts because it seems like this isn't going away. This isn't just some sort of fad. It's like, I think, a very broad theme across a lot of different medical industries. So just curious, like, maybe are we thinking about this the wrong way? And can businesses in this industry sort of align the way that they do business to be more conducive to this type of patient?
This is definitely definitely in Kim's wheelhouse. But I would, if I might, just put out there that I think everybody needs to know what your clinical hour is worth. What each one of your professionals in your office is worth, and then you have to back out and figure out what you can and can't do. But I'll let Kim is the certified expert in this area.
Well, I should preface that for 2 years, from 1999 to 2001, I was the director of professional relations at HearPO, which is now Amplifone. I always forget those 2 years. Not that they were bad, because they were awesome, and I learned a lot. The first thing I'll have to say is, and I can tell many stories about how I can substantiate this. Some of the reasons a TPA is in the space is because of the shenanigans of providers. And that providers were, I'll give an example. I met with a Blue Cross plan and in a given state, and they showed me claim after claim of hearing aids, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. And these patients had $2,500 benefits. And how it was supposed to work is you were supposed to offer people something within their benefit. They were supposed to acknowledge that they were offered something within their benefit, and then they could upgrade. But what happened is that it was a unionized employee, and the unionized employee went to their union and said, you said I had a hearing aid benefit, and they told me I owed $7,000. And so then the union complains to the Blue, and they couldn't control it. They couldn't control that upper limit. So they turned to a third-party administrator. And that's what happened in my HearPO days with workers' comp. I mean, HearPO had a huge workers' comp contract with the Washington Self-Insured over containing these upper level prices. And so some of it is on us. The second is we have to find out from these entities what care is in the bundle. And then we have to provide the evidence-based care around that. Well, around that's not in the bundle and private pay it, or when it's in it, can I afford to do it based upon my standard of care? And so sometimes the answer is going to be no, you can't participate. Sometimes you can make it work because the way the program works, but we have to provide that evaluation that we're talking about, a true communication and functional needs assessment where you're looking at cognition and falls and depression and all of those things. That is not in that program. That's a diagnostic service. And you could private pay that, but you got to provide it.
Right.
And you have to be able by licensure to provide it. I mean, I've had a lot of beautiful things in my career. I've been blessed. My proudest thing is my licensure law in my state. We can do evaluation and management. We can do basic health screenings. We can do interoperative monitoring. We can do these things, but it takes boots on the ground to get these changes done so that your abilities to what your scope is open up. And everyone thinks, well, you're going to have a fight. No, I got the medical society on my side early on. But you just have to try. We have to do the work, whether it's at the licensure level or whether it's at the care we provide. We have to do the work and we have to change the model. It's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, it's my soapbox, so I got off of it now.
No, I think that's actually, it's a really interesting point though. And I think like this idea of changing the model, I think is the theme. I mean, in so many different ways, it feels like that's at the root of everything right now is this, it's this like kind of the writing feels like it's on the wall. Like it's like, whether it be with the 3PAs or it be with OTC, or it be with all these new online providers, it just seems like the status quo isn't really going to be relevant all that much more. And so the challenge, I think, is how do you adapt, not to like use cliches, but how do you, as a provider, make yourself relevant in today's day and age? And again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I feel like it all comes back to this idea of you have to have a significant perception of value, and that value comes down to this idea of consultation and being an expert and this idea of charging for your time.
Practice audiology to its fullest scope.
Yeah.
We've also, I mean, there's some interesting ideas. For example, Dan Quall and Brian Taylor have written for us on triaging patients. Right now, the way that things are set up, a vast amount of your clinical time is consumed by a small percentage of your patients.
Yes.
And yet everybody pays the same. And they have, I know Dan has proposed triaging patients, and trying to classify them in various ways to try and delineate who is going, who's going to be, the least clinical hours, a middle, an average clinical hour, and a lot of clinical hours. And, generally that goes with severity of hearing loss, but it can be, like Kim mentioned, some sort of cognitive test or something like that could put a lot of dexterity, a lot of things that go into that, right? So, unbundling and having a more fair system where people who don't need your much services, or as you suggested, Dave, going out and getting your own widget and bring it in for help and individualized tuning or whatever. And again, that's where I think hearing aid manufacturers would really, it benefit for our industry to be able to address those losses and kind of seamlessly move in between hearing aids. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like the theory of the triage. So I work in a mindset of, so in my life, we triaged everybody on the phone before at scheduling and then your appointment was set up based upon what your needs are from the triage. So we triage the 8 warning signs of ear disease plus tinnitus at scheduling. And then you would build in that communication and functional needs assessment that could be done that day. And it's not an audio. This is a true, like, you're doing inventories, you're doing speech and noise. You might do unaided real ear because that can help you pick your coupler. You might take, some of this might take you down a road of cognition or processing or dexterity. And then you create a care plan. And that care plan may include other professionals. That care plan may include a widget. And you guys should not be surprised. When I fit hearing aids, I didn't talk about makes, models, and styles and things with patients. I asked them a lot of questions and then I picked the hearing aid.
Yeah.
I mean, why are we going where the patient is picking the hearing aid? They don't know. Like, I just even had my daughter's old nanny, who's part of our family. Her son just got a cochlear implant for his single-sided deafness, and they made her pick the product. Like, are you kidding me? She didn't know, and so I helped her pick it.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing. We're not owning the expert.
Yes.
And then you create a pricing structure where if I had a new patient, I would say, you don't know what you don't know. A service plan might be good. But if I had a patient who'd worn hearing aids before, I'd look back at their old chart and go, you never came in. There's no reason for you to buy this service.
Right.
And then you charge for your chunk of time. And you can code that, you can monetize that, you can bill that to insurance. But again, I'm sorry if I sound frustrated, but I gave my first talk on unbundling 13 years ago.
Wow.
And we're still, and HLAA made that a priority in 2011 and we did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I feel like sometimes I'm like hitting myself in the head with a hammer.
But in fairness too, I mean, the overall isn't the overall medical system, Kim, kind of moving back toward an outcome based where
Right.
It's more bundled?
Well, yes and no. And what I would say by yes and no, that's some of the alternative payment models, or a hospital outpatient perspectives payment system is in that bundled, but they haven't found yet that the outcomes are always superior in that type of model. I think what I'm seeing more in healthcare is a patient centric, that you're taking a patient down a journey, whether you encourage them down this path or this path or this path. Where they've had the most success is in that expert journey.
And therein lies our hugest opportunity,
right,
of being to demonstrate to general healthcare that hearing healthcare is essential. Not only essential for reducing social isolation and loneliness and depression, but also for patients adhering to doctor recommendations because they can hear the doctor.
Right.
Because they can hear the doctor. And I always, my next door neighbor is a primary care physician who only works with low-income senior citizens. And I'm constantly, he'll say his patients can't hear him. I'm like, then have you referred them? Like, this is like a vicious cycle of a conversation.
I remember I saw a study. It was conducted. It was a survey in the industry. I want to say it was Hearing Health That Matters conducted it, and it was across like 1,000 different professionals. And one of the things that just jumped out at me was the number one referral source, and this is probably no surprise to you two, is fellow medical professionals. And so it seems like that, like you said, Karl, is a massive opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I've had Nick Reed on the podcast before where we talked about the, Johns Hopkins Achieve trial. And I think that could be one of the most important areas of research. I mean, if it does validate that hearing aids do in fact help to mitigate the spread of dementia or the rate of cognitive decline, I think then you get a whole lot more buy-in from general physicians. Going all the way back to what Kim said earlier, though, we have to validate that hearing screening is effective. So something I wanted to ask you to, being in the industry for a little while, And as somebody that hasn't been in here as long as you two, this feels like a game-changing moment for me, but that just might be because I haven't been in here as long as you two. And I'm curious, like, is this, in your opinion, are we at a moment in time right now where you get that sense that, Kim, to your point, you were talking about unbundling 11 years ago, and it's like you're beating your head against the wall. Nothing seems to really ever change. But in light of the pandemic, in light of all of the sort of macro trends that were transpiring leading up to that, stemming from the PCAST and all of the OTC legislation, it just seems like there's a lot of different things that are sort of transpiring right now that sort of result in this impetus to change. And I'm curious, is this just like another go, or do you feel as if this is a moment where we are kind of in the midst of maybe some true change that this industry is undergoing or about to undergo?
My opinion is that, obviously there's the convergence, all those things that you talked about, David, whether it's OTC or big box or 3PAs or and now, just to make things really fun, we just threw in the pandemic, right?
Right.
Teleaudiology and the blended model, I think I think those are things that everybody's going to have to deal with. And one of my first writing assignments in 1994 was writing about how baby boomers were going to change everything, and it took about 15 years after. So, in other words, it's hard to predict when change will happen, but certainly financial pressure will be a big determining element of when push comes to shove. And I think people with the OTC legislation and everything else, I don't think OTC is going to change everything. I don't think it's a big threat. I think it's a huge opportunity, but it's certainly change. And just like big box exerted downward pressure on ASPs, average sales prices, the OTC should have an effect, and so will 3PAs. We can't managed care is. I see people, in chat saying, "Oh, we shouldn't do any managed care." Well, that's the way things are going. In medicine and everything else. I don't think we're going to be with all due respect to their arguments, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it. But we need to do it in a way that hopefully, particularly with Medicare, doesn't put all private practices out of business, and that it's done in the right way.
I would agree with really everything Karl said. I mean, I think where we have been two issues that we have at play here is, and Karl will probably disagree with this, which is cool. The manufacturers have made it. They have fought change. They have fought the changing of the model. They have anytime that audiologists or dispensers want to explore changing, doing this, doing that, whatever, they are ridiculed or they are dismissed by most of the manufacturers in these models. And I can say personally, the screaming that has been done at me by manufacturers and presidents of hearing aid companies over the years, I'm not their favorite person. And I mean, I'm not going to name names, but all of them have screamed at me at least once or told me I'm stupid or delusional. And then the second thing at play is that we've been really sadly reluctant to look at the change in all of retail and medical in the medical world. I think for me, I read a book. I was a big Clayton Christensen fan before he
Oh, I love
passed.
Clayton Christensen. Yep.
And I think if you read his work, you really are struck by how all of this has been evolving because of technology for the last like 20 years, and we've been reluctant to evolve along with it. And again, I am going to blame the manufacturers some for this, because they own clinics and they want to keep the model the way it is because that's what's best for them, rather than what's best for their providers. I think they would cut providers out of the picture if they could. And what I found to be really interesting in COVID is, as someone who was up on the Hill fighting for OTC, and they were fighting against self-assessment and they were fighting against all these things, and now there's COVID and they need these self-assessment tools, and oh my gosh, they're now groovy. And I found it to just be really hypocritical and ironic.
I think, well, I'll have the alter argument here. Undoubtedly, manufacturers, many of them are public companies, and their whole thing is to make a profit and repay their shareholders. All right, so it's not like there isn't that component to it. They're not altruistic companies, but they're run by people who understand that it's in their best interest to have consumers coming into the market. And like I said, I mean, it's not like they haven't tried to, in this just one example, go after the mild hearing care market, but there are certain limitations that they can do with the professional dispensing market as well.
But Karl, then why did they fight OTC then? If that was really a goal, and I actually agree with you. I think they should be wanting to expand the market, and they should go, I want them to go into OTC. I'm all for it. Right. But why did they fight it so vehemently? I know, I was on the Hill.
I think in a large part because their their customers, the dispensers, were largely against it, and even today, there are several manufacturers, almost all manufacturers, who say they're not going to get into OTC or direct to consumer types of things. I personally think that's a mistake, but I don't, I think they're very sensitive to what their customers want, and
but I don't know that they are. Their customers want to be able to compete with a big box retailer. They want to be able to compete. So, and they want to be able to compete in a managed care marketplace. So if they're that into their customer, why don't they give their customer prices that they could compete, or the ability at a price to compete with a big box retailer, or in their third-party administrator role, which they own? Many of these are owned by a manufacturer. Why do they not make it so the provider gets reimbursed for their time regardless of the product, rather than tying this, if you do a low-end product, you get $300, but if you do a high-end product, you get $800.
Right.
That I have trouble with.
Well, I think this would be a good debate for you and Carol Rogan or somebody, or Kate Carr or somebody like that. But ultimately, you brought up volume, and I think that's a problem. We're segmented into a number of different buying groups, and we can't get the kind of volume together to be able to leverage the kinds of prices that big box and mass merchandisers enjoy, and frankly, some of the networks and some of that. So I'm not going to be the face. I'm not the face of the industry.
I know.
But I think there are, having been an observer of, and having sympathies for both sides, I think there are mitigating arguments for each.
Yeah, and for me though, is I feel like they have a role in why we haven't evolved. That is,
Oh,
I think, my
absolutely.
bottom line.
I wouldn't argue that at all. I mean,
Yeah,
I think everybody's part of the problem.
I
Probably
think
including
everybody's part of the
myself.
problem. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think everybody's part of the problem.
I think those are fair points. I tend to agree with kind of everything that was laid out there. And I mean, at the end of the day, what's in the past is in the past, and now it's a matter of how do we move forward. And speaking of moving forward, I'm curious. With new technologies, this is in many ways a very technology-oriented podcast. So I'm very obsessed with the state of technology. And Kim, I agree with you. I think Clayton Christensen Innovator's Dilemma is probably one of the books that has resonated with me
Me
the
too.
most throughout my entire life. The whole jobs to be done framework has kind of changed the whole way I look at everything. And so thinking about technology, I agree. I think technology is really at the core of what's transpiring in terms of change and what we can expect to come. I think I'm really optimistic. I'm really, really excited about I think what's coming in the next 10 years. What aspects of this industry, from a technology, new services, new product offerings, anything in that realm gets you excited? And then I guess as kind of a follow on to that, this is a little bit loaded, but I want to, we're coming up on an hour here. So I want to kind of come to the conclusion of this conversation. With that in mind, for young professionals that are listening to this right now, young audiologists or hearing professionals or people that are just sort of starting out in their career, if you were in their shoes, if you were just getting started out, where would you sort of place your bets, if you will, or where would be the aspects within this industry specifically that you're really excited about that you would maybe pay a lot of mind to or put some of your focus toward? Again, I know it's a loaded question, a lot going on there.
Go ahead, Carl.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm excited about teleaudiology and telepractice. I'm excited about concierge care, where you provide care the way the patient wants to receive care, maybe in their home, maybe in their office, maybe with a hybrid like Carl talked about, where you don't have a brick and mortar location, where you're really working to and for the patient. There's technologies, whether we're talking about Shoebox, the CudaWave, or Autodata, or the Omtas. I mean, there's a lot of technologies that we can use. I'm really excited about the practice of audiology to its fullest extent, especially on the evaluative and the treatment ends that have nothing to do with the widget. And I thought about having a practice that I didn't dispense a single hearing aid. And I think that there is viability to that. That you become the evaluative expert with no skin in this, that you really look unbiased. And I think that there is a need for that. I think there is a need for the experts and to practice, not practice everything, just, I'm doing some of it, but no, you're an expert in aspects of care, and that it's much more than hearing aids.
And to that point, the entire cradle to grave care, we really give short shrift to hearing protection a lot of times. But I
forgot about that.
That's something that dentists tell you to brush your teeth and and take care of your floss and come in, and we need to be a lot more comprehensive about care. It really should be cradle to grave care and talking about at least for audiologists, falls and vestibular and you don't have to do that. You don't necessarily have to do that, but you can refer, and right. Referrals are great sources of customers too. So and tinnitus, the 80-80 rule, 80% of people who have hearing loss have tinnitus, and 80% of people with tinnitus have hearing loss. There's a lot of things that hearing healthcare professionals can do that that's comprehensive care, including the mild hearing losses that we had talked about. I think in the future, the blended care model offers a huge amount of potential for those practices who really want to expand and get in. You know, I could foresee having hearing technicians, you know, or audiology technicians in the back, helping patients on a full-time basis, or even from their offices at home, helping patients who want to be helped that way, and expanding your services. I think Kim would agree that there's a lot of problems we have to surmount in terms of interstate types of things, and she knows a lot more about that than I do. But teleaudiology is a huge component for us in the future. And if you just look at the number of hearing aid hearing aid dispensers, but hearing care professionals, as you know, compared to the number of people who possibly need our services, and whether, and you don't even have to talk about mild hearing losses there. We have a really relatively small number of practices, dispensing practices, for a large number of people who have significant hearing loss. And teleaudiology, if we don't start using it, I think that's an existential threat.
I agree. And I also think if we don't change our pricing models, if we don't have that hybrid pricing, patient-centered type thing, and I think it's an essential threat if we don't better evaluate people, because somebody else is going to step. If we keep not doing things, someone's going to step in from outside to take over that realm. That's what's kind of happened with vestibular and PT, because we have not taken over that realm. And that's what you're more, I see so many opportunities, right, but I am not as optimistic as I was before, because I've been not seeing people change.
Because our market is small. And again, I would say our market is small enough. The physical practices are small enough where there isn't that huge of an impetus to change right now. But when the economics come to be, and it might be too late then, we will need to change. But we're looking at things as largely in a glass half empty context. The opportunities for audiology, there's always going to be, in my view, there'll always be need for audiology care. I can't conceive of there not being people who don't need audiologists or hearing care professionals. They'll need expert fitting.
Yes, the expertise.
Right. They're going to need the expertise, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that there's a half glass empty, half glass full view that you could take on this. And I understand, Kim, where you're coming from with feeling like it might be half empty based on your previous experiences. That
I don't want it to be too late. And maybe because I've read some stuff that Amin Amlani has been writing and Victor Bray have been writing about how the window of change is getting smaller and smaller before it does become too late. And
there's an argument, and we can't get into it, but you know, it's very difficult for it. The expense of becoming an AUD audiologist and the payoff compared to it, you know, there's been plenty of discussion about that.
That's a huge point.
Yeah, our pipeline of professionals is not optimized.
I 100,000% agree. And there's another place where we've been reluctant to evolve to. So like if I had the perfect AUD program, you would start your AUD program by getting a dispensing license. That's how you would start. And then the program would move at the pace of the student. And it wouldn't be in this academic box. And, some people may be able to get out in a year. Some people it might take 4. And maybe you grant a master's degree to people who don't want to do things that are greater than basic audiometry, and that they have licensure for that. And then you have a different AUD degree for people who have encompassing experiences. But you're right, Karl, that is part of the problem. And again, it's just we meet a lot in audiology. We're really awesome at having meetings and forums. We are fantastic. And then we put together plans that no one executes. We excel at that. I can't be on a committee anymore if we're not going to do anything. That's like really my thing. I ask people up front, are we going to do something? Because if there's not an outcome here, I'm out.
Right.
You got to have an outcome. You got to have an outcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's definitely, there's going to be challenges that present themselves for this industry. But again, kind of going back to the theme of, I think this episode or this conversation has been largely about the value residing in your expertise. And it's a matter of figuring out, how do you monetize that properly? How do you make sure that that is front and center for the industry? And that's where the patients are perceiving your value to be, because in my mind, that's way harder for any, outside player to come and disrupt. And I just think that that's going to be where the rubber meets the road here across the next few years is, like you said, Kim, it's been a lot of talk, but the difference in my mind is that because of the legislative changes that are coming with, OTC, because of what the pandemic has done, I mean, people have to realize that even though telemedicine might be kind of, falling back into the background in this industry, that's not really the case across broad swaths of the medical industry. And the patient of today is much different. They're conditioned differently. And so you can talk all you want, but I think that what's going to happen is you're going to have a few people that really figure it out, and they're going to thrive. I think there are going to be some providers out there that completely figure this out. They realize that they're not limited to their zip code. They can have, you can employ technicians to do a lot of the clerical work, or almost adopt them to be sort of like the dental hygienist parallel within your model. I think there's a lot of different things that bode really well for the providers out there that take it upon themselves. And again, I don't want this to sound preachy or anything like that, but I think that whereas there are a lot of different reasons to maybe be a little bit glass half empty with this, I think if you take it upon yourself, there's a lot that's boding really, really well for you. In many ways, I think that the provider of today is more empowered by the sort of external environment to do really, really well in a way that prior to a lot of these macro, elements not really being in play, like these remote services that are really in the forefront of the public's mind now, they didn't exist before, and you were kind of limited to that zip code that you lived in.
And I know, Dave, that I have been like really negative Nelly, and I'm usually not.
You're realistic, though.
I 100% agree with everything you said. We have so many opportunities in front of us. And what I would say to someone who's listening, well, I can't make money at that. And my response, not to be rude, is that's bull, because you can. I can monetize anything.
Yeah.
It's all just about assigning value to your time, assigning value. What do you need to bring in to break even and make a profit, and assigning value to that time? All of this can be monetized. It's all opportunities. It's all things that will make you
100%
the queen or king or an expert in your community. But no one's going to do it for you. No one's going to hand it to you. You've got to do the legwork yourself. There's lots of people there to support you, but they're not going to do it for you. You've got to do the work.
And from a consumer standpoint, value is, and Kochkin showed this back in 2004 in Market Track. Value can be defined as percentage benefit divided by price. So in other words, if you provide a little bit of benefit for a little bit of price for somebody who doesn't have that big of a loss, they can perceive that as pretty high value. What we tend to always concentrate on is a lot of loss and a lot of benefit for a lot of cost. And I think we need to expand that equation and understand that just what you said, Dave and Kim, we got a ton of opportunity.
And Warren Buffett said, "Price is what you pay, but value is what you get."
Right.
Well, and the thing too with this particular type of solution, it has to be one of the biggest word of mouth marketing, type of products out there, because again, going back to this value piece, if you can give somebody that like being able to hear the river again or the stream, like you said, Karl, and they only paid a couple $1,000s or less. In their mind, you've just restored one of their senses. And so I think that we sort of undersell the value that this is providing. And I think that is crucial to understand, to why I think this is, when you can grow the market, when you make more people, you expose them to this value and this benefit, it's only going to grow the market because you have that many more advocates in the market that are advocating not only on behalf of the technology and in this awesome new solution that they've gotten, but they're going to bat for you. They're going and they're saying, yeah, this is the person that fit me. And maybe they're not even in my zip code. I just did a whole consultation online and they mailed me the device, or however this is going to look in the next, coming years. It just seems to me like, again, you have a lot of things going really well for you right now.
I think so too. And also it gives some great opportunities to providers to be able to practice more flexibly,
Yes.
Especially if they have, commitments outside of work. There's a lot of, I always tell people concierge care is a great model if you want to have a lot more control over your life. And like, I have a colleague here in Illinois, fantastic, who's a concierge audiologist and never closed one day for COVID. Because when you're in concierge, you have to have PPE anyway. So she already had all of this stuff. She was raring to go. And so she just was going to where people needed. And on her own time frame. What kind of awesome life is that?
For sure.
It's a win for everybody. I love wins. Like, how can everybody win?
Yeah.
And I want the manufacturers to win.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Well, Kim, Karl, this has been unbelievably awesome. I can't thank you two enough for coming on, sharing your knowledge and your perspective that you've sort of gained over the years of being in this industry. It's just so cool to hear all these past experiences and, kind of like how things have changed and where we are today. I learned a lot here. I think the audience did as well. So thank you two very much for coming on. Thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end, and we will chat with you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.